Drivers placard their vehicle in order to the risks to others. Communicate the risk. To communicate the risk, shippers must warn drivers and others about the material hazards. The regulations require shippers to put hazard warning labels on packages, provide proper shipping papers, emergency response information, and placards. These steps communicate the hazard to the shipper, the carrier, and the driver. The basic description of a hazardous material includes the hazard class, the ID number, and the proper shipping name, which one must appear on the shipping paper. Shippers are required to describe hazardous materials correctly and include an emergency response telephone number on shipping papers. The shipper. The shipper uses the hazardous materials regulations to determine the product's proper shipping name, hazard class, identification number, correct packaging, correct label and markings, and correct placards. Must package, mark, and label the materials, prepare shipping papers, provide emergency response information, and supply placards. Who is responsible for checking that the shipper correctly named, labeled, and marked a hazardous materials shipment? Who is responsible for choosing the safest route to transport placarded radioactive material and refuse improper shipments? The carrier. The carrier takes the shipment from the shipper to its destination. Prior to transportation, checks that the shipper correctly described, marked, labeled, and otherwise prepared the shipment for transportation. Refuses improper shipments. They report accidents and incidents involving hazardous materials to the proper government agency. A carrier must choose the safest route to transport placarded radioactive materials. After choosing the route, the carrier must tell the driver about the radioactive materials and show the route plan. Leaking or damaged packages should. The driver must make sure the shipper has identified, marked, and labeled the hazardous materials properly. Refuses leaking packages and shipments, placards his vehicle when loading if required, safely transports the shipment without delay, follows all special rules about transporting hazardous materials, and keeps hazardous materials shipping papers and emergency response information in the proper place. The hazard class of all materials specifies. Definitions. Some words and phrases have special meanings when talking about hazardous materials. Some of these may differ from meanings you're used to. The words and phrases in this section may be on your test. The meaning of other important words are in the glossary at the end of section 9. A materials hazard class reflects the risks associated with it, and there are 9 different hazard classes. If you need to placard a vehicle for hazardous materials, at least how many placards will you need? Shipments are placarded based on the placarding. Attach the appropriate placards to the vehicle before you drive it. You are only allowed to move an improperly placarded vehicle during an emergency in order to protect life or property. A placarded vehicle must have at least 4 identical placards. Placards must appear on both sides and ends of the vehicle. Each placard must be easily seen from the direction it faces, placed so the words or numbers are level and read from left to right, at least 3 inches away from any other markings, kept clear of attachments or devices such as ladders, doors, and tarpaulins, kept clean and undamaged so that the color, format, and message are easily seen. To decide which placards to use, you need to know the hazard class of the materials, the amount of hazardous materials shipped, and the total weight of all classes of hazardous materials. The product ID markings on a tank must be placards. Placards are used to warn others of hazardous materials. Placards are signs put on the outside of a vehicle that identify the hazard class of the cargo. A placarded vehicle must have at least 4 identical placards. They are put on the front, rear, both sides of the vehicle. Placards must be readable from all directions. There are 10 3/4 inches square, square on one point, and a diamond shape. Cargo tanks and other bulk packaging display the identification number of their contents on placards or orange panels or white square on point displays that are the same size as placards. Hazardous material identification numbers may be displayed on placards or orange panels. The hazardous materials will be named on HMR lists. There are 3 main lists used by shippers, carriers, and drivers when trying to identify hazardous materials. Before transporting a material, look for its name on 3 lists. Some materials are on all lists, others are only on one. Always check the following lists. Section 172.101, the Hazardous Materials Table. Appendix A to Section 172.101, the list of hazardous substances and reportable quantities. Appendix B to Section 172.101, the list of marine pollutants. What column shows to what shipping mode the information on the line applies? The Hazardous Materials Table. Figure 9-4 shows part of the Hazardous Materials Table. Column 1 tells which shipping modes the entry affects and other information concerning the shipping description. The next 5 columns show each material's shipping name, hazard class or division, identification number, packaging group, and required labels. The plus sign in column 1 means what? Five different symbols may appear in column 1 of the table. The plus sign shows the proper shipping name, hazard class, and packing group to use, even if the material doesn't meet the hazard class definition. The symbol A appears in column 1 of the Hazardous Materials Table, section 172.101, means that the hazardous material is A means the hazardous material described in column 2 is subject to the HMR only when offered or intended for transport by air unless it is hazardous substance or hazardous waste. What does the I in column 1 symbolize? W means the hazardous material described in column 2 is subject to the HMR only when offered or intended for transportation by water unless it is a hazardous substance, hazardous waste, or marine pollutant. D means the proper shipping name is appropriate for describing materials for domestic transportation, but may not be proper for international transportation. I identifies a proper shipping name that is used to describe materials in international transportation. A different shipping name may be used when only domestic transportation is involved.